Edwards, the coffee with the extra flavor lift, brings you Night Editor.
Eric, please take a rewrite from the police reporter.
Night Editor, starring Hal Burdick in another of his famous stories from back of the headlines, titled Lightning Strikes Twice.
Murder. That's what it was. He'd murdered a man. They didn't send you to prison for a couple of years and then let you out on parole for that. They put you in a chair and burned you with electricity, white and blinding, like the lightning that was beginning to play along the ridge of distant hills.
If you're a real Night Editor fan, there's proof you'll enjoy the story Hal has for you tonight. And if you're a real coffee fan and like a second cup with your meals, well, chances are you drink close to 2,000 cups of coffee a year. So finding a really good coffee is important to you. That's why you owe it to yourself to try delicious, roaster-fresh Edwards coffee. You'll like Edwards coffee, I feel sure, because it's specially blended according to Mr. Dwight Edwards' own personal formula from the choicest Central and South American coffee beans, blended to bring you an extra flavor lift. Edwards, you'll discover, is extra rich, extra good. Edwards coffee is featured and fresh ground to your order at all Safeway stores. Buy a pound and try it. Your money refunded if you don't agree. It's really grand coffee. Now we join Hal and Bobby. A thunder and rainstorm swept over the city tonight, and instead of going down to the corner lunchroom for their customary late cup of coffee, Hal and his assistant are down the corridor in the home economics department. And there they...
Nice and cozy, I calls it.
Yeah.
I just hope the girls don't notice the inroads we made on their Edwards coffee when they come in tomorrow.
Oh, I don't think they'll begrudge us what little we took, Bobby.
Besides, they couldn't expect us to go out in a storm like this. And on top of that, Hal, I'm scared of lightning.
So?
No fooling. I hate thunderstorms.
Well, you can take comfort in the knowledge it never hits you but once.
Meaning it never strikes twice in the same place?
Though, you know, I once rounded up some facts that in a way might be called an exception to that rule. Yeah, in the story of what happened to Rick Williams.
Who was Rick Williams? Some pal of yours, Hal?
Well, hardly. Rick was an ex-con, Bobby, a petty larceny stick-up man. Until that certain stormy night when he added murder to his list of crimes. Yeah, and that was the night this incident happened. The night lightning struck twice.
For the love of Pete, don't stop there, Hal.
Well, it was like this, Bobby. Rick didn't want to kill the service station man. Murder was completely outside his line. When he came up to the highway from the water tank where he'd left the freight train just at dusk, it was with the idea of an easy stick-up that would put a little money back in his pockets. And by Rick's standards, it was the fellow's own fault. Instead of putting up his hands, he came at Rick with a tire iron. Rick backed away, warning the fellow, but he kept coming on. Even then, Rick had no intention of killing him, but his foot slipped on a grease spot, and he fell. The fellow was right there over him, ready to brain him. Rick tried to shoot for his hand, but his aim was bad, and the fellow went down. Rick pulled himself to his knees, crawled toward the man. The bullet had caught him just under the heart, coursed upward. He was dead. Rick stood up, trembling, his heart pounding madly. He'd never killed a man before. Made him feel kind of faint, standing there, looking down at him, lying so still. Yeah, and he felt cold, too. A chill sharper than that of the wind, which was freshening ahead of the gathering storm. Murder. That's what it was. He'd murdered a man. They didn't send you to prison for a couple of years and let you out on parole for that. They put you in a chair and burned you with electricity, white and blinding, like the lightning that was beginning to play along the ridge of distant hills. Well, he couldn't stand there. He'd have to get going quickly before someone came along. No houses nearby. No one could have seen or heard. Get away fast. The guy's car was there. Grab it. Get going. Sure, when the cops found out, the car would be hot. But by then, as the car swung out onto the highway, an idea began to take form in Rick's fear-maddened brain. Sure, the car was hot, but it also could be put to good uses. Drive it back down to the water tank. Leave it there. When they found it, the dumb cops would go for the easiest answer, that the killer had changed his mind about using the car and decided to hop a freight. Only Rick wasn't hopping any freight. As he guided the car down the dark road toward the tracks, the rest of his plan was taking form in his mind. About a mile up the track, up a dirt road on a little knoll, there was an old house, empty for the past 6 months or more. He'd seen it when the freight was slowing for the water tank siding. Later, hiding in the brush until dark, He'd heard two bows by a jungle campfire talking about it. One of them had used it the night before. They'd talked about going back there to get out of the approaching storm and decided in favor of going on into the town a few miles further on. Why, it was made to order for what Rick needed in this emergency. While the cops were covering all the highways tomorrow, searching all the trains, he would be hiding out in the last place they'd think of looking for him, right there under their noses, within a couple of miles of the scene of his crime. The first gust of rain hit him in the face as he left the car and hurried on up the track as fast as the darkness and the insecure footing of the ties would let him. Wind was getting stronger, too. Going to storm plenty. That he didn't mind so much. If only that lightning would stop. He never did like the stuff. It made him nervous. And now it made him think of something else. He'd seen it once when he was working around the prison as a trusty. A straight, squarely built chair with straps and other gadgets on it. They put you in it, and a guy threw a switch, and the electricity went zigzagging through you like lightning hitting a tree. And after that, a closer flash of lightning turned the night into a split second of incandescent daylight. He cried out and cringed away from it, and quickened his stumbling pace. The full fury of the storm was around him when at last he reached the old house. Even then, he didn't go right on inside. There was something sort of awful and deathlike about it, standing there empty, silent, like the gravestone to some man's hopes, with the skeleton arms of trees tossing and weaving around it, and the moaning of the wind. It was like the shuddering groan of the service station guy as he went down when the bullet hit him. Yeah, perhaps. A jagged splinter of lightning ripped out of the darkness, closer now, its eerie glow making the old house look more tomb-like than ever. There was no choice. He had to go on in. Out under the trees was the worst place to be with a lightning that close. The glow of the match cupped in his hand showed him that he was standing in what must have been a living room. Windows on three sides, fireplace against the wall. He blew out the match. There was no chance of anyone being out in this storm, but just as well not to show a light. He'd stand there for a minute, then have a look around. After that, sure, he'd feel better. As soon as the storm passed and that lightning stopped, he'd be all right. And his idea still was a good one. The ideal hideout until it was safe to move on. Around him, the empty house was filled with ghostly voices. The creaking and groaning of the frame in the wind, the rattle of branches against the roof, like hurrying footsteps. He tried to force himself to move on toward a door beyond the fireplace, but the strange terror of the darkness held him where he stood. And then it happened. Outside, a blinding flash that flooded the empty room with cold blue light, and with it his own scream rising to mingle with the deafening crash of thunder. In that brief instant of light, he'd seen it. A man standing outside the window, his white face pressed close to the glass. The gun was out of his pocket, clutched in the cold dampness of his palm. His body was numb with an icy fear that poured through him with each beat of his pounding heart. He couldn't have been mistaken. He'd seen him clearly, if only for that fraction of a second. Or was his imagination playing tricks on him? Had this old house, and the thing that happened back there at the service station, and the storm, and the lightning, whetted his fear into making him see things that weren't there? Oh, of course, that must be it. Why, even if they'd found the body and the search had started, no one would have followed him here. He was safe from the cops, from the storm, and from the lightning that made him think of that little room with its grim chair. Hang on to his nerves until the storm quit. That's all he had to do. But wait. Hey, what was that noise? Was it someone creeping along the side of the house? Or just branches rubbing against the wood? That slow, awful squeak. A door opening cautiously. Or a loose shutter. His ears pushed against the living darkness. His staring eyes tried to pierce the blank wall of it. It'd be easy for anyone to sneak up on him with the whole house filled with those crazy noises. Sure, the guy could hide there in the dark, and on the next flash of lightning drill him before Rick had a chance to shoot. Well, it wasn't going to happen that way. His guess was there'd be a narrow hallway running back from the front door to the kitchen entrance. The other guy would try to come in the back way, get out in the hall by that front door. At the first sound from the other end of the passageway, start shooting. Even in the dark, he couldn't miss. And if it proved to be his imagination, so what? He was as well off spending the night in the hallway as anywhere else. His back was against the door as he crouched there, waiting, listening, while all around him, from the deep recesses of the old house, the voices of the storm mocked and jeered his terror. And then a sharper sound, like a foot pressing against a squeaky board, a louder squeal as of a rusty door hinge. Rick straightened, the gun level in his hand, his heart pounding with sledgehammer blows against his ribs. The guy was there at the other end of the hallway, waiting, as Rick was waiting for that next flash. It came suddenly, close by, burning away the darkness, flooding the black corridor with blinding light. And with it, Rick saw him, at the far end of the hall, tensed forward, gun raised, ready. Only for a second, but that was enough. To the blackness that followed, the flash of his gun was spitting fire, the roar of it tearing holes in the louder explosion of the thunder, the hot lead of it slatting down the narrow passageway until the gun was empty. Then... silence. Rick knew he had him. There was no doubt of that. He'd gotten him with the first shot. No answering fire. But he wasn't going to investigate. He was getting out of there, storm or no storm, lightning or no lightning. Twice tonight he'd killed, and he wanted only to run. Run where, it didn't matter. Run away from the madness this night and the storm had put upon him. At the foot of the porch steps, he plunged blindly onward, not caring whether he found a path or not, until the blacker outline of a big oak tree blocked the way. He stopped beside it, leaning against it, fighting for breath, wondering which way to turn. And then it came again. Once more the night blazed with fiery anger. Above him the branches of the tree seemed to fling welcoming arms toward that terrible brilliance that fused earthward from the storm-ridden sky. His death cry rose in an anguished scream as the writhing serpent struck toward him. And then Rick Williams was lying very still as the darkness poured in around him. The morning sunshine was warm and fragrant after the night storm. It lay in a golden pool around the group of people who stood a little distance from the big tree, listening to the officers who stood looking down at the crumpled figure on the ground beside it. It's the bird who killed Eddie, sure enough, one of them was saying. Look at those grease stains on his clothes. Bears out what we figured last night. He fell down when Eddie went at him with that tire iron. Yeah, he must have come up here counting on a good hideout, huh? Or we wouldn't think of looking for him. After planting the car by the water tank to make it look like he hopped a freight. Yeah. But what gets me is, from the mud tracks inside the house, he must have spent some time in there. So why would he leave it to come out here under this tree, which is the worst place he could be in a lightning storm? I don't know. Search me. And that isn't the only mystery. No. Take another look in the house. At the far end of the lower hall, there's a big built-in mirror. It's all smashed to pieces where he must have emptied his gun into it. Now, why would he do that? Shot up the mirror, huh? I don't know, Tom. Put it down to being storm crazy, I guess. That's as good a reason as any.
You know, the easiest thing in the world to make is a claim. For example, we can tell you that there's absolutely no finer coffee than our famous Edwards coffee. That Edwards coffee is specially blended to bring you an extra flavor lift. That Edwards contains only the very finest Central and South American coffee beans. And all those statements are absolutely true. But until you've actually tried Edwards coffee and tasted its delicious extra richness, you still can't know how really good Edwards coffee is. That's why we offer you this ironclad money-back guarantee. Try Edwards coffee. If you don't agree that it's all we say it is, that it does bring you a delicious extra flavor lift, your money will be refunded. You risk nothing when you buy rich, thermalo-roasted Edwards coffee. So try it, won't you? That's Edwards coffee, featured and fresh ground to your order at all Safeway stores. Get a pound of Edwards next time and see for yourself how really good coffee can be.
There's a smile and some dramatic excitement in next week's yarn as two old favorites of many a night editor story return to us. Fireman First Class Slats Malarkey, United States Navy, and Sergeant Tim O'Connor, United States Marines, in an action-packed yarn titled Important Trifle. See you in the newsroom next week. Good night.
Listen next week at this same hour when Hal Burdick brings us another of his thrilling night editor stories. This is Bill Baldwin saying good night for Edwards Coffee.